They told us it was justice. They told us it was self-defense. But what if the most famous gunfight in the Old West should never have happened at all? On October 26, 1881, in the dusty boomtown of Tombstone, Arizona Territory, a confrontation lasting less than 30 seconds would become legend. The gunfight at the O.K.Corral. A symbol of law versus lawlessness. 3 men dead, several wounded. And a story that would be repeated, simplified, and glorified for more than a century. According to the official narrative, the events were clear. Tombstone was a town divided. On one side, the law, the Earp brothers, Virgil, Wyatt, and Morgan, along with their temporary ally Doc Holliday. On the other, a loose group of outlaws known as the Cowboys, men accused of cattle rustling, robbery, intimidation, and murder across southern Arizona. Tensions had been building for months. Virgil Earp, the town marshal, had been attacked before. Morgan Earp would later be assassinated. Threats were common. Violence felt inevitable. Tombstone was sitting on a powder keg and everyone knew it. On the morning of October 26th, reports spread that several cowboys, including Ike Clanton, Billy Clanton, Tom McClory, and Frank McClory, were armed and gathering near Fremont Street, close to the O.K.Corral. According to city ordinance, carrying firearms within town limits was illegal. Virgil Earp decided to act. He assembled a small posse, his brothers Wyatt and Morgan and Doc Holliday. Their stated goal was simple: disarm the cowboys and enforce the law. They walked down Fremont Street together, coats buttoned, guns concealed or holstered. Witnesses later described the moment as tense but controlled. There was no chaos yet. Just 4 men approaching 5. What happened next would become one of the most disputed moments in American frontier history. According to the Earps' testimony, they identified themselves as law officers and ordered the cowboys to raise their hands and surrender their weapons. They claimed the cowboys resisted, that someone reached for a gun, that the Earps had no choice. Gunfire erupted. In under half a minute, more than 30 shots were fired. When the smoke cleared, Billy Clanton and both McClory brothers were dead or dying. Ike Clanton, unarmed at that moment, had fled. Virgil and Morgan Earp were wounded. Doc Holliday was grazed. Wyatt Earp emerged uninjured. The newspapers quickly framed the incident as a heroic stand by the law. Headlines praised the Earps for restoring order. The cowboys were portrayed as dangerous criminals who finally got what was coming to them. But almost immediately, cracks appeared in the story. Eyewitness accounts conflicted sharply. Some witnesses claimed the cowboys were trying to leave town. Others said the Earps fired first. Several people testified that at least one cowboy had raised his hands before shots were fired. The location itself became suspicious. Despite its name, the gunfight did not actually happen inside the O.K.Corral, but in a narrow vacant lot nearby, a space barely wide enough for such a confrontation. Why had the Earps chosen that exact spot? Why approach from that angle? Why with such a small group? Then came the legal aftermath. Instead of being celebrated and forgotten, the gunfight triggered a formal hearing. The Earps and Doc Holliday were charged with murder. A judge would decide whether the killings were lawful or criminal. During the hearing, testimonies shifted. Statements contradicted earlier reports. Witnesses changed details. Some claimed memory lapses. Others suddenly appeared or disappeared from the record. The judge ultimately ruled that the Earps and Holliday had acted within their duties. No trial would follow. No punishment would be issued. Case closed. At least, officially. Over time, the simplified version hardened into legend. The Earps became symbols of frontier justice. The cowboys became villains. Movies, books, and folklore reinforced the same narrative again and again. But history is rarely that clean. Why were arrest warrants vague and inconsistently enforced? Why were some cowboys disarmed earlier that day, but others left alone? Why did political rivalries between factions in Tombstone align perfectly with who survived and who died? Why did certain testimonies vanish from later records? Most importantly, if this was simply about enforcing the law, why did it end in an execution-like shootout instead of arrest? The story we were told is neat, comforting, heroic, but the closer you look, the more it feels constructed. And that raises the question no legend likes to answer. Was the gunfight at the O.K.Corral an unavoidable act of justice? Or a calculated confrontation shaped by power, fear, and convenience? Because once you step away from the myth, the facts start pointing in very different directions. And that's where the real investigation begins. If the official story were solid, it would not need defending. And yet, for more than a century, the gunfight at the O.K.Corral has been defended over and over again. The first theory is the one most people already know, the version that became history. According to this interpretation, the Earps were exactly what they claimed to be: men enforcing the law in a town on the brink of collapse. Tombstone was volatile. Violence was common. The cowboys were not harmless ranchers. They were widely suspected of rustling cattle, intimidating witnesses, and operating as a criminal network across the territory. Several were already known to carry weapons openly and challenge authority. From this perspective, the gunfight was not a choice. It was an inevitability. Supporters of this theory argue that the Earps had exhausted their options. Verbal warnings had failed. Arrests had been ignored. The cowboys were armed in violation of city ordinances, and previous encounters had already turned violent. Virgil Earp, as town marshal, had both the legal authority and the responsibility to act. Eyewitnesses who favored the Earps claimed that the cowboys were aggressive, defiant, and unwilling to disarm. They insist that at least one cowboy reached for a weapon first, triggering a chain reaction that no one could stop. In the chaos of that moment, hesitation could mean death. The rapid pace of the gunfight is often used to support this argument. Less than 30 seconds. No time to negotiate. No room for mistakes. In a frontier town, a delay could be fatal. The judge's ruling after the hearing is also central to this theory. After reviewing testimony and evidence, the court concluded that the Earps acted within the scope of their duties. No criminal intent was established. No charges were upheld. From this angle, the case is simple. The Earps survived because they were prepared. The cowboys died because they resisted. The legend exists because justice prevailed. But simplicity is often a sign that something has been left out. The second theory challenges the foundation of that narrative entirely. This interpretation suggests that the gunfight was not a spontaneous act of law enforcement, but a deliberate and legally questionable confrontation, one shaped by power, politics, and selective justice. Tombstone was not just a mining town. It was a political battlefield. The Earps were aligned with business owners, mining interests, and Republican factions. The cowboys were associated with rural voters, ranchers, and Democratic interests. Law enforcement was not neutral. It was deeply entangled with local power structures. Under this lens, the decision to confront the cowboys that morning becomes suspicious. Why were arrest warrants vague and inconsistently applied? Why were certain men targeted while others were ignored? Why did the Earps approach armed men with a force nearly equal in number, instead of calling for reinforcements or attempting arrests earlier? Several witnesses testified that the cowboys were already in the process of leaving the area. Others claimed that some had raised their hands when the Earps approached. The location of the confrontation, a narrow lot rather than an open street, limited movement and increased the likelihood of violence. Then there is Doc Holliday. Not a lawman. A known gambler. A man with a volatile reputation. Why was he deputized for such a sensitive operation? Why was he armed with a shotgun? Why include someone so closely tied to personal grudges and past conflicts? Critics of the official story argue that this was not about enforcing the law, but about asserting dominance. A show of force. A message. The hearing that followed did little to resolve doubts. Testimonies conflicted. Some witnesses changed their stories. Others were discredited or dismissed. Political alliances between the judge and the Earps supporters raised serious questions about impartiality. In this version of events, the gunfight was not justice. It was legalized violence. A confrontation engineered to eliminate rivals under the protection of a badge. And if that is true, then the legend was not born from heroism, but from convenience. The third theory goes even further, into territory where documentation fades and motive becomes harder to trace. This perspective suggests that the truth may lie not in guilt or innocence but in fear. By 1881, Tombstone was spiraling. Murders were increasing. Authority was fragile. Rumors spread faster than facts. Everyone believed violence was coming, even if no one knew when or how. In such an environment, perception becomes reality. The cowboys believed they were being targeted. The Earps believed they were losing control. Each side expected betrayal. Under this theory, the gunfight was not planned in detail, but emotionally inevitable. A collision driven by paranoia, pride, and the pressure to act before being acted upon. No grand conspiracy. No clean heroes or villains. Just men trapped inside escalating tension. Once the first shot was fired, whoever fired it, the outcome was sealed. The aftermath was shaped not by truth but by survival. Those who lived controlled the narrative. Those who died could not contradict it. Over time, memory hardened into myth. Doubt was smoothed over. Ambiguity became certainty. And history accepted the version that was easiest to tell. So where does that leave us? With documents that don't fully align. With testimonies that contradict one another. With motives that overlap and blur. The gunfight at the O.K.Corral remains one of the most famous moments in American history. Not because we understand it, but because we think we do. Maybe the Earps were brave lawmen who stood their ground. Maybe they were enforcers for a system that benefited them. Maybe everyone involved was both right and wrong at the same time. The real mystery is not who fired first. It's why we've been so comfortable believing there was only one truth. Because when you strip away the legend, the badges, and the gun smoke, what remains is something far more unsettling. A moment where justice, fear, and power collided, and history chose the version that survived. Now the question isn't what the records say. It's what you believe happened in that narrow lot in Tombstone, Arizona, when 30 seconds reshaped the meaning of the Old West forever. If you enjoy investigations like this, where history is questioned instead of repeated, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and join us in uncovering the stories that legends tried to bury.